Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about what's happening in Yemen with Iran, and of course, what's happening in Gaza.
Trust nothing. Serve no one. No lies. Free your mind. Everything is propaganda. Everything. Propaganda. Everything is propaganda. So why not choose your own?
Okay, so first I'd like to start with this report from Ynet, which is a well-known Israeli digital publication, and they were reporting on the mass Hannibal, essentially, as Max Blumenthal describes it, a confirmation of mass Hannibal. Essentially, they were friendly fire orders that came down from Israeli military high command, instructing their soldiers to use any means necessary. And for those of you that aren't aware, the Hannibal Directive is essentially a policy by the Israeli military to prevent Israeli soldiers or civilians from being captured by Hamas or by Palestinian militant groups, so that those groups cannot use those captured civilians or soldiers, those captured Israelis, as leverage during negotiations. The Israelis want to have as much power over the Palestinians as possible. One of the ways that the Palestinians have been able to successfully negotiate is by capturing hostages and then trading them. In the past, Palestinians have captured Israeli soldiers and have traded them for hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners. So the Israelis implemented this policy over a decade ago, where they decided, essentially, when it comes to IDF soldiers that have been captured, they're going to just kill them. And it's inspired by the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who was successful in defeating the Romans many times. He was a brilliant commander and general, but eventually the Carthaginian Empire was defeated by the Romans, and the Romans were hunting Hannibal down, and Hannibal carried poison with him. And right before he was captured, he decided to kill himself because he would rather die than be captured by the Romans. And so this inspired the Israelis. That's why they named it after him. And they essentially decided that it would be more merciful for their soldiers or their civilians to be killed than to be used as leverage during negotiations to be traded, which obviously goes against Israeli interests. They'd rather give the Palestinians nothing. And so they decided, I guess from their end, that it would be more merciful, or it would be better for the state, the interests of the state, to just kill these people. And so what this report by Ynet does really is confirm what many of us have already suspected, that the Israelis implemented a mass Hannibal on October 7th because they realized very quickly that they couldn't get the situation under control before Hamas could capture loads of hostages. And so they decided essentially to use scorched earth tactics and essentially kill everyone by any means, right? And so that's why, as you can see here, 70 cars hit by Israeli helicopters, tanks, or anti-tank missiles, and at least in some cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed. That's confirmed by this report, that's confirmed by interviewing helicopter pilots, and that's confirmed by hostages who survived. There are Israeli hostages who have said that they witnessed a car get blown up in front of them by an Israeli helicopter, and they were lucky enough to survive. And as you can see here, as Max reports, firing regulations were completely abandoned. The tank operators and helicopter pilots were essentially told, hey, all the regulations that you normally follow, don't worry about them. Abandon those regulations, just get the job done. And so normally if there's a situation, they would say, well, we shouldn't fire on that home because there could be a civilian in there, or it's too close to a civilian, or there could be some collateral damage. Don't fire. Those regulations were completely abandoned. And so this, I think, just confirms for us what we've already been suspecting. We've, I think, reported on this, and many other people have as well. And if you're watching this and you follow us, you most likely are already in agreement. But essentially, we all suspected that the Israelis were responsible for the deaths of many of their own people. But now we have, confirmation, more confirmation, I should say, from Israeli media, specifically in this article by Ynet, confirming that this is actually what happened. Now, does this change anything? No, I don't think the Zionists will ever admit this. It doesn't matter how much the Israelis continue to investigate and report on this. They won't care. They're going to continuously lie and say all the different things they've been saying. When it comes to atrocity propaganda, babies were beheaded, babies were burned, people were mass raped. They're going to continue to say all these ridiculous things. They don't care about the truth because it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't work for them. They have to try and justify their genocide. And so that's unfortunately what's taking place. Okay, pivoting now, I want to take you to Yemen. We know the Houthis have been applying a lot of pressure in the Red Sea with their blockade, essentially firing on any cargo vessel going to Israel or affiliated with Israel in any way. And of course, the Houthi stated objective is, we want the genocide in Gaza to end. So as soon as the Israelis retreat from Gaza and stop their genocide, we will stop the blockade. Sounds like a pretty reasonable request. However, the US and the UK are not happy with this, and so they've decided to strike. A week ago, they targeted Yemeni positions, Houthi positions. So as you can see here in this picture, they targeted an airfield and they took out a couple hangars, maybe took out some helicopters and some planes. And I'm sure you've already seen this before, but in this visual, you're getting an idea of what route a ship would normally take from Taiwan through the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and then going through the Suez Canal and then making its way north of Africa to Europe, to the UK, for example, or to Amsterdam or the Netherlands. But because of the Houthi blockade, they've had to sail south of Africa, around the Horn of Africa, as you can see at the very southern tip, the Cape of Good Hope. And this has extended. Normally the trip would take 25 days. Now it takes 34 days, which is more fuel, it's more time, there's more risk, which means there's more insurance that you have to pay for. So it's been costing companies, shipping vessels, a pretty penny, which obviously is going to affect consumer goods for people all over the world, really, but especially in the West. Now, in this image here, you can see a United Kingdom Royal Air Force Typhoon aircraft, and it took off from Cyprus. So when they struck Yemen, they were taking off from the island off the coast of Israel, Cyprus. And this is just another image here documenting the takeoff of a fighter jet from Cyprus. Now, despite the US and the UK striking targets in Yemen, they haven't been able to actually stop the Houthis from continuing their attacks. And so shortly after being struck by the US and the UK, the Houthis struck a US-owned dry bulk ship. Now, this ship didn't have any injuries and it was still able to sail, but what it indicates is that the Houthis still have the ability, even though they've been struck by the US and the UK, and they say there are about 75 strikes, they still have the ability to fire. And a lot of people say it's because the Yemenis have, for years, because they've been fighting Saudi and the UAE mainly through the air, they have become accustomed to getting airstruck. So they know how to conceal their weaponry, how to move their weaponry. And so even with satellite imagery, even with fighter jets, it's difficult to really cripple the Houthis. So as you can see here, this is the route that the Royal Air Force took, taking off from Cyprus. It looks like they flew over Gaza, through Israel, potentially through the south of Jordan, and then crossing into Saudi Arabia. And so this is why people say the Saudis were complicit in this strike, even though the Saudi Arabia has quote unquote condemned the strike. Saudi Arabia still had to grant the Royal Air Force taking off from Cyprus permission to enter their airspace. Jordan may have potentially done so as well. We know obviously the Israelis did. And so you can see how the Saudi Arabia, even though they're speaking the language of being against the strike, they actually are complicit because they allowed them to fly over their airspace. And you can see in the south, the different locations of where the Royal Air Force and the United States struck the Houthis. Now, like I said, the Houthis have been able to continue their attacks in the Red Sea even after being struck by the US and by the UK. And so this is concerning because now the US has essentially opened the door for an escalation, for a war with the Houthis. And the Houthis are God-fearing people. They're not afraid. They're actually inviting, the West for an invasion, which is pretty crazy to think about, given that they've been suffering for over 10 years, war, famine, blockades, sanctions, things of that nature, but they're still, willing to fight because they are ideologically driven and they want to support the people of Palestine. And so they aren't afraid of an escalation. Because the US and the UK have now attacked them, now the Houthis are saying, we're not just going to attack Israeli ships now, we're going to attack US ships. And so that's exactly what happened the other day when the Houthis struck a US-owned ship making its way through the Red Sea. Now, it seems like this is probably backfiring on the US. They don't want to show weakness and give in and say, okay, we will, pressure Israel to end the genocide in Gaza, even though that's the right thing to do. It's probably even the logical and rational thing to do. The US and the West feels like their authority is being called into question. They're not going to negotiate with a group like the Houthis. And so they decided to use force. But their objective is to do what exactly? To clear up those Red Sea lanes so that they can get shipping under control. But this is actually having the opposite effect, if you think about it, because even though they are there saying, hey, we're going to protect you, so go ahead and sail through the Red Sea. Actually, what this does is make the situation more dangerous because now US, UK, Western ships are potentially going to be targeted now as well, as we've already seen. And companies are not interested in sailing through a war zone. So even though naval ships and fighter jets are there saying, hey, we're going to protect you, you still have rockets flying around. And so as you can see here, the Shell company, and this is a week old now, but still, they suspended shipping through the Red Sea. And they've done this because they don't trust shipping through the Red Sea. Even if the US and the UK are going to be there firing rockets trying to stop the Houthis, it's still dangerous. And the effect that it's having is that it increases the insurance rates. A cargo vessel can take a lot of containers, can have a lot of value on the ship. And so you can imagine that one ship could actually be carrying anywhere between 50 to $100 million worth of goods. That's a lot of money. Insurance companies will often say, okay, we'll charge you 0.1 or 0.2% of the entire total value on the ship. So 0.1% of $100 million worth of goods on a ship is going to cost about $100,000. That's a pretty penny, but that's worth it. You want to protect your assets, right? Because it is risky sailing. Anything could happen. But now, because of what the Houthis are doing and because of the presence of the US and the UK firing weapons to prevent the Houthis, now there's this escalation and there's a lot of ballistic missiles in the air. There are drones in the air. Insurance companies have increased the rates to 0.7%, and now they're saying even up to 1%. So now $100 million worth of goods on a vessel needs $1 million to insure. So you can see the insurance rates have basically 10x'd. So instead of paying $100,000, you're now paying $1 million to insure the goods that you're trying to sail through the Red Sea. This is obviously too expensive for many shipping companies, and you would think they're very profitable, and a lot of times they are, but they also, in many cases, they operate on very tight margins. So to tell a shipping company, hey, your insurance is going to rise from $100,000 to $1 million makes a big deal. And so the Houthis have been very effective in this way. And the US and the UK getting involved doesn't necessarily improve the situation, at least not in the short term. Okay, I want to show you this picture now. This is a ship coming supposedly from Iran heading towards Yemen. Now, this ship was intercepted by the United States, and they took pictures of what was on the ship, and what they found were goods and equipment used to produce ballistic missiles. Iran has been sending equipment to Yemen for the Houthis to then engineer and put together to create the drones and the ballistic missiles that are being used against the Saudis, to be used against any of their enemies, to be used right now in the Red Sea. So this ship was intercepted. In the process of intercepting the ship, there were 2 U.S. Navy SEALs that fell overboard. Apparently, this section of the Red Sea, this time of year, there are very large waves. So supposedly there was a 10-foot high wave that hit a Navy SEAL that threw him overboard. Another Navy SEAL trying to save him jumped in, and then they both disappeared. And they've been looking for them for 5 days. They haven't been able to find them. The assumption now is that they're dead. They're still looking for them. But that one Navy SEAL trying to be brave and save the other one, potentially lost his life in trying to do so. That's a story I thought I'd share with you because, intercepting the vessel and seeing how Iran gets their goods to Yemen, but also, just kind of understanding what happened to these Navy SEALs because people have been talking about them for the last few days. Okay, pivoting now to Iran. So yesterday, Iran fired ballistic missiles towards northern Iraq and Kurdistan. Specifically, they hit a compound in Erbil, and Erbil is viewed as the capital of the autonomous Kurdish region of Iraq. And this image you're looking at here is the destruction of this compound. The destruction this compound took, it's clear that a very powerful ballistic missile hit it. And Iran claims that this compound, which actually belongs to a Kurdish billionaire, is actually a Mossad headquarters. This compound is not very far from the US consulate in Erbil. And so that's why people early on were saying that, oh, Iran struck a US base or the US consulate. That's not true. They hit this compound. Now, the Kurds are saying that this wasn't a Mossad headquarters. This was an innocent man's home. He's a billionaire. You killed him, his wife potentially, and his baby daughter, which is very tragic. But what Iran is arguing is that they had very good intelligence suggesting that this was actually a Mossad headquarters, and Iran insists that they killed 4 high-level Mossad agents. Don't know what the truth is. I would imagine that Iran wouldn't just strike a random billionaire's home, and so I have to imagine there's some truth to their claims, but it's also very difficult to tell. So I thought, I'd share that with you. So this is the Kurdish billionaire. He was killed in the explosion, and unfortunately his baby girl was killed as well. The Kurds are completely rejecting the Irani claims. They say it's not true, that is not a Mossad headquarters. So there's debate over what actually happened. Now, Iran didn't only just strike Iraq, they also hit Idlib in Syria. This is an image of a building that in Syria, apparently the organization, the White Helmets, claimed, no, this was a medical facility. What Iran is arguing is that, no, that's not a medical facility. That is actually an ISIS training facility. Now, what is Iran's beef with ISIS? First of all, ISIS has been giving Bashar's regime trouble in Syria, and Iran obviously backs Bashar. But ISIS also, they're ideologically opposed to the Shia, and they've been waging war against Shia militant groups and Shia populations in Syria. And obviously Iran is aligned with Bashar's government and the Shia populations. But ISIS also recently took credit for an attack in Iran. And there was, about a month ago, there was a memorial event for the fallen general, the Irani general Qasem Soleimani, who in Iran is held in high regard. He's responsible for much of their success strategically in the region, specifically in Syria as well. And during the memorial, 2 suicide bombers detonated explosives, and they killed up to 100 people, and they wounded about 300 people. So ISIS took credit for this attack. Some people speculate the Mossad were involved as well. So Iran decided to retaliate by striking this alleged Mossad headquarters in Iraq, but they also decided to strike Idlib, Syria, and they claim this is an ISIS training facility. The White Helmets claim no, this is just an innocent medical facility. Don't know the truth, but there's actually another element to this. So if you look here at the range, it's pretty impressive. Iran fired from southwestern Iran a ballistic missile that traveled 1,200 kilometers and hit Idlib in Syria, right? But if you track the distance to Tel Aviv, theoretically, that rocket could have hit Tel Aviv. Some people speculate that striking the so-called ISIS training facility in Idlib is actually a hidden threat to Tel Aviv and Israel, saying, hey, we have the capability to hit you. So by striking Idlib, actually what they're showing Tel Aviv is, we can hit Idlib, we can hit you. And so the idea is to communicate to Israel that, hey, if you want to escalate with us, and if you think you're going to be safe, we have the ability to hit you and hit you hard. So this is all speculation, of course, but this is an image that's been shared widely on Twitter. A lot of people are speculating about this. Now, Iran didn't only just strike Iraq or Syria, they also struck southwestern Pakistan, specifically in the Balochistan region. There is a group called Jaish al-Adl, and it translates into the Army of Justice. They're recognized apparently as a terrorist organization. This is my first time hearing about them, but this group has claimed responsibility for several attacks against military personnel in Iran, because they don't just operate in southwestern Pakistan, they operate in southeastern Iran as well. They describe it as a porous border, meaning it's very easy to get across, and they are supporting Sunni populations in Iran, and they've been waging war against the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And so Iran decided to strike them as well. At first, there wasn't a lot of complaints from the Pakistani government. In fact, the same day they had the strike, Pakistan and Iran had joint naval operations together. So it seemed, some people speculated that Pakistan, gave the green light to Iran to do this. But then later, when it became clear that children may have died, it's unclear really what happened. But if children did die, I don't actually know if children died. But after reports came out suggesting that they could have been killed, Pakistani government came out and they condemned the attack, and they said they're going to investigate. So what the truth is, I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting development. It seems like Iran is trying to show their people that, hey, we're fighting back against terrorism. And they have to do that because just a month ago, they lost over almost 100 people and 300 people wounded. It's embarrassing for the government. It shows, hey, they can't protect their own people, but also their people are angry. They want revenge. And so it seems like the strike in northern Iraq, is to show their people, hey, look, we're taking action. So they strike Iraq, they strike Syria, and then they strike Pakistan. And they've actually had another strike this evening as well. So this is the update I wanted to share with you guys. I hope you enjoyed and benefit. Don't forget to hit that like, comment, and subscribe.